Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Visiting Writers Series. I'm Steve Hayward, Chair of the English Department here at CC. This series is sponsored by the Colorado College English Department with the support of the Visiting Writers Endowment. Colorado College is located in Colorado Springs, Colorado, within the unceded territory of the Ute people. The earliest documented peoples also include the Apache, Arapaho, Comanche, and Cheyenne. An extended list of tribes with a legacy of occupation in Colorado can be found on the Indigenous Community at CC webpage. This semester, Visiting Writing Series events will be on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. They're open to the public, but advanced registration is required. To see this year's schedule, go to the English Department page on the CC website and look for the link to the Visiting Writers Series. Or you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram for dates and detailed reader info. Our next reader is next week when Idris Goodwin, director of the FAC, will be reading from his newly published book, Can I Kick It? That's next Tuesday, October 6th at 5 p.m. Thank you for joining us. Our featured reader tonight is Professor Natanya Pulley, and here to introduce her is CC student Magali Blasdell. Magali is a senior English major with a focus on creative writing. She is taking off the first 2 blocks of this year and using that time to work on the draft of the novel that will be her senior thesis. In the summer of 2019, she was a student assistant to Professor Pulley for what is currently called the Tiger Lily Project, a novel exploring Neverland from the point of view of Tiger Lily from Peter Pan. In Magali's free time, she is training her new rescue dog to stop lunging at squirrels on walks. Please welcome Magali Blasdell.
Hi, everyone. I am honored to introduce Professor Natanya Pulley, who will be reading from her latest nonfiction project and from her short story collection, With Teeth. If you are a fan of psychological thrillers and chilling beauty, you are going to love this collection. With Teeth explores the horrors that humanity is capable of, and the almost nonchalant tone of the narrators, paired with the often unsettling circumstances of their lives, keeps the reader wondering how it's going to end. These stories make the reader feel as though it's a part of everyday life to be observed, to feel as though someone is watching, and that you should definitely be afraid of what may be hiding under your bed. There are also stories like Herpes of the Heart, which makes the reader laugh as much as they must think, and read between the lines of a narrator who cares as passionately as she pretends she doesn't. Natanya's nonfiction work has been highly anthologized and published over a number of journals, and her most recent project explores the self in relation to family, home, and the United States as a digitized version of what truly exists. More of her works can be found in journals including Split Lip, Monkeybicycle, The Offing, Waxwing, and As Us, a journal of writers of color from around the world. Her essays can be found in Counter-Narratives from Women of Color Academics, #NotYourPrincess, Voices of Native American Women, Women Write Resistance, and most recently, Shapes of Native Nonfiction. She received a PhD from the University of Utah in fiction with an emphasis in the evolution and de-evolution of novel forms. Natanya is an assistant professor of English at Colorado College, where she teaches texts by Native American writers, fiction writing, and experimental forms in ethnic literature. Her short story collection, With Teeth, was published last fall by New Rivers Press and is a winner of the 2018 Many Voices Project competition. Please join me in welcoming Natanya Pulley.
Thank you, Magali and Steve. And I just want to give a thank you to Erica Hardcastle and Julia Barrett, who are handling all the Zoom and technical side of things, which has been wonderful. Yat she'e Natanya Yanisha, kia ananishla belagana bashasche, tachini dashashendo belagana dashanela. I get to go to Diné at Stan Nishle, Colorado Springs, the Hairstreak in the Provo, Utah, the Nasha. Hello, my name is Natanya Pulley, and my clans are Kia'ani and Tachini through my mother. I identify as a Navajo woman. Aketigo means in this way, so through these clans I identify as a Navajo woman, and I currently live in Colorado Springs, but grew up in Provo, Utah. I'm really happy to be here today. I'm going to be reading one short story, and then also read some segments from a nonfiction thing that I'm working on. The story that I'm going to read is called Did You Find Your Killer Yet? And actually, it was the very first story I read at CC when I first was hired. And at that point, I think it was a draft. So I'm very excited for it to be in the book now. It's also up at the Offing Literary Journal online. So if you're looking for it, you can find it there. Did you find your killer yet? When Dee Ann's body was found, the town became nothing but a wail. It began in the family dining room, where all the piles of lost child flyers took resident on the scratched pine table. The neighbor women and family friends and one half-sister of Dee Ann's mom began to wail as well. Some inside the mouth, under the tongue, some aloud in words like they're there, and someone should really. The wail grew to the rest of the family, the rest of the street, and down through the soil, so that once anyone reached the small town, they too became a part of it. When Dee Ann's body was found, the town was a wail, except for in one solitary person. She was indeed the last to know of the incident, for when Dee Ann died, no one remembered to tell her. And she wasn't a ghost, and she wasn't a memory birthed back into life. She was flesh and bone, and all the things a living young girl should be. At first, Dee Ann thought it might be a game. Not now, Dee, they said to her when she tugged at arms and declared herself. Not now, they said again, a little meat in the voice, a little gruff, a little substantive. When the detective faced her parents and held his hands in front of him, then behind his back, and then at his side, screaming for them to stay still, Dee hopped and ran in circles in front of him, but nothing. Her parents had become strange anchors on the couch, as if the world was a sea, as if the water had filled their lungs, and only songs of seaweed and crustaceans bubbled in their brains. The detective stood, her parents stayed on the couch, and a family therapist leaned into the scene from a puffy, floral-patterned chair. The family cat stretched, claws nearly stuck in the couch leg, only to pull the claws loose and close again, up and under its body, lost to the fluff and black-gray swirl of itself. Dee Ann insisted she was not dead, and each in turn said, not now. Once the detective retreated, the therapist went to the kitchen to make tea and to lean against the counter and rub her stubby fingers into her eye and push away her desire to text her not yet boyfriend with something about this tragedy, a partial invitation so he could say something meaningful and heartfelt and soulmate-like to her, or so she could pretend it was never an invitation to begin with in case he didn't. Not now, she said to Dee. She hit send and waited for her phone screen to go black. If not now, then when, Dee said in her best, almost mature voice, the one she picked up from a girl 2 years older down the street. If not now, when? She practiced the words a few more times. They were good ones, the kind that unlock something in adults, like great vault doors giving way to a future made present. Fine, said the therapist, but we've only to talk about this once. We can't be wasting time when there's so much more to do, like to address the anger and the bargaining and the floral arrangements. Tulips, the therapist mouthed and turned her head to the not now girl. Well, I'm not dead, Dee Ann said. She put her hands on her hips and she put her chin at a tilt to the right, and she refused to lose any eye contact with the therapist. Have you heard of denial? The therapist asked. I'm here and you can touch me and this is flesh and blood and the words coming out of my mouth and you can hear them and I can feel myself growing. I can feel my cells holding a secret of tomorrow and the tomorrow after that. Sure, but what of it? When you were so young, just too young, said the therapist. She looked at her phone. You never even got to kiss someone and oh, what that man probably did. The therapist's shoulders and chest made several shudders, and she blinked 1,000 times, and her thoughts were bulldozed back into a landfill. I'm not dead, and nothing bad happened to me. Such a brave girl, the therapist said, and finally let go of the counter and quarter-turned to lean down to Dee. We have to accept many things in this world, brave girls or not. I'm accepting things right now. I've no text from my maybe boyfriend and no new shoes for the funeral service and no desire to talk to a stupid little dead thing that can't be bothered to see how it is and lie still. So, even if it is true that you'll continue to grow, you'll have to accept this very hard thing. Dee, brave and smart and idiotic and trusting and head of fluff girls die all the time in horrible ways, and the world is cruel. Acceptance, the therapist whispered, and turned to finish making all the tea and check her phone and count the amount of tea bags left in the cupboard and to check her phone and to tidy her mess and push herself back into the front room and to check her phone and head back to the whale. Dee couldn't imagine following her and entering that space yet again, hearing that wail from her mother's hip. It was the only part of her mother that had not developed a hint of sound before. It was a quiet place, her mother's hip, where she balanced Dee Ann as a baby, as a toddler, and once as a kid who clung to her when she burned her finger. The mother's hip remembered the weight of the child, remembered the slight thrust it needed to balance the child, while her other arm was free to fight the world for her. The doctor's office was the smell of staleness and sweat and tired, on top of the smell of things sterile and Clorox and anti-everything, all of which was coated in the smell of choked flowers from a spray can. The doctor typed notes into the computer from a yellow notepad, and each hit of the spacebar was deliberate and produced a clack that filled the room. And Dee tried her best not to interrupt too loudly, as Dr. Jens had always been a warm and solid entity within Dee's life, despite what others continued to say. Not now, the doctor said, and brushed a small tear developing in the eye. Your body was so cold. It was just so cold. And even under that sheet, and not the TV blue of corpses I had readied myself for, it was a loss of blue and a loss of color altogether, even in that once dark skin of yours. Well, you can touch my arm now if you'd like. It wouldn't help. The blood moving through you, the flesh that is storing its secrets, and the bone that continues spewing out its coating matters very little right now. You are gone to us, Dee Ann. Gone, gone, gone. The way of things tossed away. Well, I don't feel tossed away. I don't feel gone, doctor. It matters little. When they found you, your body, it was all the stuff of nightmares, you know. What with the song, atmospheric and sobering in the background while the sun went down and the volunteers flushed themselves throughout the forest, the soft glow of flashlights bopping about, and then the shouts were heard and the detective looked raggedy, angry, and still sure-footed his way over. It was all very dramatic. By the time I got there, the sun was back up, and though I shouldn't have, I just kept saying, who would do this? Who could do such a thing? Of course, the autopsy would prove it, you know, blunt force and whatnot, and ligature marks and whatnot. Here, I wrote it on a piece of paper. Dee grabbed the doctor's yellow pad to see blunt force and whatnot, ligature marks and whatnot, time of death, TBA. The detective will say it was premeditated, of course. When you were just sleeping or at school or looking at cans of SpaghettiOs at the grocery store, this future was unspooling out in front of you. People have died here, of course, but you, so young, who could do such a thing? The stuff of nightmares. Dee shook her head. She felt deep inside herself and tried to meditate on her liver and spine. She tried to listen to her veins, and nothing in her felt dead at all. Nothing felt silent. She was thrumming and awake. As she rode her bike to the police station, her legs and heart were pumping a certainty through her. Her blood was hers. Her air was hers. There was nothing between the world and her until she saw the first townsperson and then another and another, and she braced herself. See me and see me breathing, she waved, but a chorus of not now followed her. The townsfolk tisked and shook at her, exhausted from oh so much death in the world. Her own friends rolled toward her from the playground field to the street, like so many wayward playground rubber balls of the past. Point him out, they chanted at her. Point him out. Even Charlie motioned for her to stop, and when she did, he kept his hand over her hand. You could just point out your killer, Dee, and then we could tell someone for you. We couldn't keep this secret. We wouldn't be afraid, and we'd tell our parents, unless it's our parents. Is it our parents, Dee? Did our parents kill you? He cried. Dee brushed his hand off hers and continued down the street. Not yet, she began to scream. I'm not dead yet, she yelled, hoping to shut down that terrible wail in the town. Of course you are, said the detective. He was sitting on a bench near the police station eating a salad from a paper bag. I know, I should be eating a hot dog or a burger or a sub, he said to her. But this case has me not sleeping and not feeling well and not shitting either. He fluffed the lettuce about. Roughage, he whispered. Dee left her bike splayed out in the sidewalk as she half nodded. Aren't you too busy to talk to me? She asked in a voice that was not even like her own, a tiny one. It's fine, all I do is talk to the dead and the missing and the things gone. The detective spit out a still yellow cherry tomato. God, that sounds more interesting than it is. Well, I'm not dead. Well, we found your body. My body is right here, she put out an arm, which he reached for reluctantly, sadly, and with a of one resigned to his job. Fair enough, he said. He let go of her wrist and for a second wished he could keep that warmth of her on his fingertips, grab her up and place her in custody. He got this way with all the children in the town when he thought of all the awful in the world, put them under surveillance and lock and key. The kids' cases are always the hardest, he said. Then he pulled out a small notepad and read the words. Yeah, that's right. The kids' cases are always the hardest. The therapist said I could still grow, and the doctor didn't say I was a ghost or memory either. I think I'm alive, detective. I think I'm still here. I know I am. Could a dead person do this? And she kicked the detective in the shin, once softly and once more thinking of soccer balls and misplaced rocks on otherwise clear paths, and the way the one neighbor kid had kicked that wishful dog. Ouch. Well, I normally wouldn't think a dead person could kick me. I really wouldn't. And if you were a ghost, you could probably help save this case. And if you were a memory, I think I wouldn't care so much about this half-eaten salad. Bad tomatoes, he mouthed before continuing. But let's say you are alive. What is there even to do? Well, you could tell my parents and everyone. I don't know. We've just been through so much already. And finding your body like that, stuff of nightmares. Did I get that right? He asked and pulled the notepad out of his pocket again. Here it is. Yep, the stuff of nightmares. Maybe you should take me there then, to where you found me. Oh, it matters little. It's a field, of course, a field, and there's some woods nearby, and it was at the end of everything, and we looked for footprints and tire tracks, and we talked about access roads, and the town therapist isn't very good at profiling, but one of the volunteers offered up some thoughts on the dump site. He caught himself still talking to someone. Oh, I'm sorry. That's what it was. You were dumped there, as you know, but I don't. Well, there didn't seem to be any struggle or anything in the area to suggest that the deed was done there. Nope, you were snatched or invited somewhere else, and then all of the things of our nightmares played out. And then your body there in the field where we found you. It happens like that, you know. Well, that's what I hear. Hold on. Yep, here, I wrote it down. Find in a field, call it a dump site. I'm on the mark today. Does it say anything else about catching the guy or about what becomes of my life? Oh, well, the wail will quiet down eventually, I think. Though there will be moments when people remember you. Your parents must sit themselves still sometimes, and sometimes even acquaintances will suddenly think of you. They'll be sad and think about how it could have happened to their own. Oh, and my investigation will lead me to a family member or a weirdo in town, then the last person we ever thought of, and then to myself, and then to the woods where there will be a story about what lies buried in there. And then possibly to your doctor, who will, of course, suffer at the hands of someone seeking justice, only to find it was not the doctor. And then I think back around to the neighborhood kid who kicked that dog. Sometimes I might think it is a stranger, an outsider. And wouldn't that be something? Out of nowhere, right? Catching a serial killer, he said, and dreamed the dream of putting a small town and its small town cop on the map. God, it matters little anyway. The investigation? No justice. Wait, did I get that right? Yes, here it is. It matters little, no justice. I said anyway. I said it matters little anyway. I think it's still okay though. I need to talk to my parents. I think you're supposed to talk to your killer, actually, but I don't have a killer, detective. Nonsense. You better find one. Everyone has one, and maybe if you would have found yours sooner, this wouldn't have happened, young lady. And if it didn't happen, it matters little, no justice. Crap, I think I got that wrong again. Dee Ann's bike scraped along the sidewalk the same way it always did when she picked it up carelessly, a tiny metallic red scratch left on the cement. The bike ticked and ticked the way it always did when she walked it slowly. Dee Ann passed all the houses she normally did and all the storefronts she normally did. She even stopped to coax the yapping dog behind the beware dog fence, like she always did. Do you think my killer is inside? She asked the Pomeranian Yorkie mix. But it only yapped back, and she imagined her days spent walking about town asking for her killer, as if that is what young girls are supposed to do. What she needed was someone to work it out with her, someone whom she trusted who could also keep a secret, someone who would open their door if she showed up. And this someone, she began to realize, was most likely the one who was waiting for her unsuspecting body to end up in his or her hands. A teacher or a tutor, the grocery store clerk, the gas attendant, the priest, the town do-gooder, the mean guy, the bully kid, the silent one, the weirdo, her parents, her neighbors, the stranger, an authority, the no one, everybody. It really could be anybody, and it was really always everyone. Before Dee Ann went to the edge of the town to escape her killers and the haunting of her fated body, she decided to spend one last moment with her parents and the family cat. At first, she worried she was indeed a ghost, as time had left her home completely. Her mom sat at the kitchen table, her dad at his desk, the cat at its empty bowl. If the wail was still here, it was too loud to be heard. Its vibrations became a vacuum. It was only when a small tuft of her mother's hair moved as Dee Ann slid in next to her that she knew there was still time for her parents. There was still air, and there could still be a sound in the world. Not now, her mom said, the words so quiet, it was almost as if they weren't said at all. I heard they found my body. Yes, your body, but not you. But I'm here now, Mom, right here. I know, my hip aches, like you could crawl back onto me. I think my body was built with you. You against my hip, against my shoulder, your head in my crook. I'm still full of you, and all of my indentations are yours. They can be again, I'm right here, Mom. Did you find your killer yet? Mom, I'm not dead. That matters little. We've been through so much already. When they found you, I'm right here, Mom. Dad will see. Don't bother your father. He is not the same. We are not the same. It's just as they say, you know, the loss of a child and the horror of man, the evil in the world. It's just as they said it would be, the stuff of nightmares. We should have warned you, and maybe we did. So many shoulds. So many ways we did things to keep you safe. The detective said we could lock up all the children and keep them under surveillance, and maybe that is the thing the world should do. We should have done. Her mother pulled Dee Dee's warm hand into her own. She kissed the tips and rubbed her forearm. She almost pulled her into her, like pulling at bed covers, like gathering warm laundry before dropping it on the bed to be folded. There's always some child out there, Dee Ann, in a field and in a basement, and brown girls like you in plastic trash bags in the river. We knew it happened, but never knew it could happen to us. We've only acceptance to do now, moving on, and one day at a timing, and coping, and your father and I will probably divorce, and one of us might drink or worse, and we'll lose the mortgage, of course, because we won't be able to work. First, the funeral, though. Her mother sat up and wiped a tear. Dee Dee, I don't think you should go to that. There's very little for you to do there. Go on now, you little dead thing. We've no use for your living now. The family cat gave one last brush up against Dee Ann's hand, darting away before she could touch her back. The soft padded steps of kitty paws made their way up to the family den, to the father, worn silent and shooting above. When the cars began lining up at the chapel, Dee Dee set her bike down on the grass and tried her best to stand out of the way. Many told her to get going, and others said she was a lovely girl, but they've all their answers now. Others nodded, and some ignored her completely. The neighborhood bully was the only one to stop to talk to her. You smell like the living, he jabbed at her, and then shrugged and picked up a rock and threw it at nothing. I don't know why I'm so mean, he said. I don't know why I'm dead, Dee Ann said. Well, you're not, of course you're not, but they tell me it matters little. Better to sort it out now, I guess. Have you been there yet? He leaned close to her. The hand he placed on her shoulder was soft and gentle and barely the weight of a bird. To your dump site, the crime scene, your unresting place? She shook her head. He sighed and leaned even closer and kissed her cheek. I just wish it were me. The stuff of nightmares, she said. At the edge of the main road, at the edge of a road full of potholes, at the edge of the dirt road beyond that, at the edge of the field, at the edge of the woods, at the edge of the very town, Diné Ann walked back and forth along a fence. The posts were too old and broken to touch, and the thought of slivers frightened her. Who would care to pull them out? And the fence wire, though drooping and thin, seemed too dangerous a thing to cross, something to be tangled in, something to slow her down if she were running for her life. She thought to slump down and let the brush prick at her dress, thought to move no rock or stick, but only to sit and feel her way through a real death, a real last breath, a real permanent coldness to her. But there was a shuffle closing in. It started as if from everywhere, from every corner of every world. So known to us all, it took its time toward her. There was nothing but time for this sort of closing in, nothing but its inevitable reach. She waited for it to come, for rough hands and a gentle voice, or gentle hands and a rough voice, for it to be the last person she thought of, and the first, for something in her, a nerve or a cellular knowledge, a fated code that said, yes, this, I was built for only this. The shuffle shrank from all the space around her into one location and moved from her inner ear to her very real ears, gathered its speed. From the other side of a fence, a sigh sob and the thwap thwap of weeds hitting shins and knees. A young girl from the neighboring town emerged. Can you see me? She asked. Am I alive? I think so, but what do I know? Diné Ann said. They say I am dead, the girl said. They say I've nothing but evidence to me anymore, nothing but the will of the world. They say my body has been found and it's a nightmare of a world. The stuff of nightmares? Diné Ann asked. No, the girl held the word long in her mouth. Then she said, a little brightly, a little hopeful, the detective said a nightmare of the world. The two girls sat on either side of the fence, facing back towards their own towns, facing back toward the wails that emitted from them, that wail that said it's such a shame, that wail that said the world is going to hell, that wail that continued to ignore them, the living, and simply agreed the death of little girls was just another part of life, and therefore another role to play. Well, said Diné Ann, cheered enough to straighten her hair and smooth out her top. Mine said stuff of nightmares. So at least there's that. For this next piece, this is a nonfiction piece that I'm working on. And it came about from an essay I wrote about 2 years ago. And it was actually quite a dense essay and I didn't really know what to do with it at all. And then I started kind of playing with it a little bit and putting in older pieces, and eventually it began to grow. So it's what I'm working on, or what I've been working on this summer. And my idea behind it was to think a little bit more and work a little bit more in writing about colonization, but I didn't want to approach it the same way that I guess I see a lot of people approaching it. And just to mean that I kind of wanted to take the power away from it and flatten it. And that's not to say that, you know, that there's anything good in that, but just to be thinking about the difference between how we make something into a monster that destroys us and how something else is part of a system. So that was my attempt in this piece. It doesn't have a name yet. Okay. Oh, so I started looking at colonization and the way we look at history as if it's a virtual reality or like a computer program. I retell myself a story. the virtual world began when the first colonizer arrived, a choreography of ones and zeros. Before land was the land and people were the people. The land became a game world space, an equation of space, time, and movement, and imagined potential, space to be filled, empty, blank, and they call that white space. White space is never truly blank and never truly empty. It has its designs. What came before the arrival of this game space was not just a force with which they must reckon, but the invaders saw a threat. Physical, yes, but also a threat like a memory drain, the end of a story of triumphant relocation and new starts. If this invading power source did not have this memory program of expansion and exploration, if it did not have a white space, a lie of blank space to begin its startup mode, it would have to acknowledge all that came before as a power source, its own source, a competing power source, a rooted power source, more than source, but a way. It would have to reconcile power of people and land. It found there was no room for a new soul power source here, and the dream was threatened. So in the beginning, there was only the imagined empty and the fantasy blankness and the white dream of the game space. This is the lie this origin story fills itself with. It is the first rule. It is the first rule of virtual space. The first colonizers did not see beings or society or valuable connections at work in this space, because to do so would mean acknowledging the empowered time space already present. The game space had to superimpose its origin memory program and insist the first peoples were seen as peoples, yes, but conquerable peoples. Thus, the power source won because it conquers. Conquers land and people, true, but it conquers and consumes a story whenever it can, and always. So this next section is a longer essay about going to Mesa Verde with my parents, sort of as like tourists, but also not tourists, because we know a lot about it and have been throughout that area a lot. So I'm just gonna read the end of this section where we have taken a tram back from one of the sites over back into one of the parking lots. And we're with a family there as well that we don't know. And we've just seen a bunch of wild horses. As the tram kicks up again, the woman asks the driver why no one has come to take the horses. They are just there for the taking. There for the taking becomes one word each time she repeats herself, until she insists the horses wouldn't be expensive to keep. A short huff escapes the man next to her, and he begins muttering about costs. No one suggests ownership of the horses means a longer look at horses as non-native animals in the West, the development of the park for preservation, and the stories of the people of the land, Ute, and ancestral Pueblo. Not to mention treaties or invasions and colonization. No one is talking about this, and that no one is me. I'd already made a contract with myself to keep the conservative peace with my parents for as long as I could on this trip. It's my first time on a trip without any of my siblings, and my first time alone with just the two of them for some many days on the road. And my child self is feeling seen and spoiled. I asked to stop at snow cone stands and at almost all the roadside stands, even though we've plenty of jewelry makers in our family to buy from directly. And I want to save my battles for more meaningful exchanges than clueless tourists. I shoved my "you are on Ute land right now" comment back into a hard, calcified part of my spine when the woman asks which tribes live nearby. The tour guide gives a lengthy response indicating the Utes and Navajos have been throughout these areas for years. And she nods and said, yes, yes. Then she turns to their children who are sitting behind us, and looking between my mom and dad, she says, oh, those are the ones that are filthy rich. They have casino money. They are filthy rich. Our day of playing tourist is over. And I can feel we are rambling and just taking it all in mode of sightseeing drain away. First from my fingers and then strangely in my ankles, like I can't grab anything and become anxious someone might hand me something. And if I stand, my legs will slip off my ankles, and my hips, torso, and head and arms to follow onto the ground. I think they call this floored, and baffled and found dumb, with enough of that conquered and flattened feel to pull the air out of the doorless tram. Mentally, I'm walking back to our arrival at the park, and I can't tell if we were fooling ourselves thinking we just wander along the scenic overviews and pit houses, or if there's even such a thing as sightseeing for us. Or maybe we were never really sightseeing and just looking and just being together. We were at the beginning of our journey, and so far, despite some rocky past in my youth with my parents, we were having so much fun, so very close to something. So I decided to downshift, not make this a moment in which I have to teach someone else what it means to not be an asshole, and remind myself that I do not have to take responsibility of every ignorant thing said around me. This woman would need to be nothing to me, though I am not the kind of person to think of people as nothings. And I fall for teachable moments and the deep pits that can be dressed as teachable moments. It's not tolerance or cowardliness that keeps me quiet this time, but self-preservation. Just shut your trap, Natanya. But both my mom and dad begin speaking, and it's no longer just me and the weight of all on that tram. My dad says the casinos aren't the kind that she's thinking of, and my mom says their tribe is many, and no one sees the money unless it's a very small group, and even then. And I start sputtering something about there's no such thing as rich when the land is stolen and covered in blood. And I might just be saying stolen and covered in blood over and over. You can't buy it back, not with horses, I say. It wasn't those moments like the Twitter shames us into, and it wasn't a tidy TV moment when an audience has been lured into acknowledging a truth, but just long enough before the next trek. Nor did we answer in logical, informed, and sincere voices or towards a listening, thoughtful human. We were flummoxed and full of half statements and tripping words and salt and lightening nerves. And I hated that we had to be doing this. But there we were, three of us, and despite the blown pistons, those numbers held strong. And I might have been the one to say my mom is Navajo. When we were asked how we know all of this stuff, as if it's a precious knowledge hidden in the ether of the internet, I said she was Navajo and that I was half. And that's when they wanted our picture. And the girl behind me kept saying, "That's cool, that's so cool, that's cool." This is rule 2 of the game space. One must imagine there's such a thing as conquerable, as in it happened, as in it is done, as in we were and are and can always be a conquerable person or people. Ash people will be lost in the world, careful touching us, they say, and forget that ash can heal. But we must remember there is only imagined temporary control, imagined obliteration fueling this rule of conquerable space. The game space likes or needs us to see genocide as successful obliteration and not attempted killing of the whole, in entirety, the past gone. However, there was no conquering because here we are. There was no total control over people, or there would be no custard to feed or Standing Rock or songs for the missing and murdered, or this writing in front of you, which comes from a web of Indigenous writers writing in front of us. The game space denies this. It needs us to believe genocide works. This is how the game space can condone its equations of obliterating the women of the first people along highways and homes and surfacing in quiet lakes, dismembered within their garbage bag burials or burned to unsmudgeable powder in beehive ovens. The game space thinks if even now, long after its own origin program story, if it can control the women, it can control the bodies. And if it can control the bodies, it can control the people. It asks us to remember all Indigenous as a conquerable and already gone people. But here's the thing about programmed origin stories. The new power source did not control a new people or their land. They control only their own game space. They control a space, time, and movement potential. They lay it upon the first way of life as if to smother. They control the game space of the now conquered history, and they play it out for others again and again. Manifest destiny, expansion, accelerator, groupware, on repeat. It undid nothing of the land stories, but creates a fatal atomic static. For this next portion, I just have some images that I want to show alongside. So I'm going to share my screen. So that should be working. Is it working, someone?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Oh, wait a second. Okay. There we go. On the way from Provo, Utah to Tuba City, Arizona, we would check the gas station for my grandmother, not for her physically, but for her painted likeness. On the racks of postcards and thank you, sympathy, birthday, just cuz cards hung the possibility of finding her portrait painted by a Southwest white male artist and distributed on paper goods from cards and calendars to collector plates. My mom's mom, Martha, Arizona, had some portraits, or rather he had some portraits of her, but we still come across more online. Martha, Arizona, Shamasana holding a lamb, looking off to her left, smiling, or is that just her squinting in the sun? My friend Martha, holding something in her hand, looking to the right, mid-story, mid-remembering. Martha and her friends, my grandma and her sheep. Navajo weaver, and there's a few called that with a few variations. Is that Martha shearing sheep and carding wool and making fry bread? A Navajo grandma's touch as she sits near her corral petting a lamb with my cousin on her lap, never looking at us, but always the sheep, the far off distance, the work in her hand. More of my cousin out there too, our Venus happy day and puppy love, and then more of other people's cousins and mothers and fathers and herds and litters and rugs and weavers, and homes and deserts. Detailed gorgeous work, the crush of velvet in Martha's blouse and the shine of heavy silver here and there, a bracelet, necklace, buttons, embellishment on the collar, wool, dirt, the wood of the corral. This felt like a gift, back when the artist was still living and visiting Martha between paintings and sending much needed goods in handwritten letters and with her still strong as sand. To see Shamasana rendered in almost photographic strokes of deep blues and browns, I thought I was just seeing my grandma. Realism as real, each wrinkle a type of wisdom and life-worn loveliness. And I still love these portraits. But now I can spend some hours searching her name, the artist's name, and known titles and descriptions of the paintings through an image search to find her, and sometimes uncredited, a Navajo woman, and sometimes photos of the paintings available or sold from galleries, my mom's mom, her blood and story hanging up on someone's wall. I have a book of the artist's work and a few items that were printed using her portraits. Among them, she is on the cover of an airline magazine called American Way. Martha and her new kitten. This was a complimentary take-home copy. A 6-page article with images including a real photo of the artist sketching her as she weaves. I haven't read the article because I know who she is, but my parents tell the story of this cover. They are on an airplane, seated, pull at the magazine in the pouch in front of them, and there she is. And they had no idea, and scooped up as many copies as they could. After my grandmother moved on, my mom said we must not keep around those gone, must not live in our grief or invite her back into our sadness, must move on. But my mom, she hung one of my grandmother's velveteen blouses and a long and tiered satin skirt up on the wall, mustard yellow blouses and cream skirt, almost like something you'd see at a museum. I'd catch her staring at it. She didn't have the same enthusiasm she had for when showing it to guests. Instead, she bit at her lip the way she does, as if she's a young girl again, mulling, not quite sure what it is doing there. But I think this is her way of having one of those portraits for herself. When I say I'm Diné, people want the woman in the painting. When I used to say I was half Navajo, they wanted the woman in the painting, and they say things like, your mom must be so happy to have those paintings out there, by which they mean to know that they are out there hanging on the walls of strangers for the pleasure of those strangers, as if the strangers are the world and as if the world accepts her and always has. Sometimes I dream of commissioning contemporary Diné artists to paint her portrait in their own styles, not in competition with the realist portraits necessarily, but as a ceremony for it, a balancing ceremony, or one way of hemming it in, a way of closing that door. Other times, I wonder what type of person I would have to become to find all the keepers of my grandmother held in oil and canvas and to demand them back. The truth is, I don't have a loud fire in me, but I do have a steady one. If anything, it keeps me moving forward. And I'll just read this last rule 3 and then this other little section. Rule number 3. Oh, wait. There's another picture here. Okay. Rule 3. After the first colonizers arrived and saw this imagined emptiness, this blankness, this whiteness to write upon, they laid out an equation. And this was another program, a big one, multifunctioning. This is something that ran from and through into various parts of their systems, systems of self, of communication, of being, systems of power. And these programs continue to tendril up in our daily lives, even here and now, while I tell a fake origin story through its truths, while I share how the lies tries to, but does not beat us. And yes, even while I'm using the colonizer's language, the program for writing on and through whiteness must find a way to prioritize itself to stay. Rule 3 of the colonizing game space means superimposing an equation worthy of sacrifice on the lived time and place of those it seeks to destroy. The sacrifice is native blood and history, which is still US history, and the earth as a living world. This program is in the name of growth and endurance. If the game space could love, it would love those things. But it does not love, and it only craves and swallows. It replicates itself. And remember, please remember the game's tricks. Remember, growth and endurance are not equations to spin out from a starting point only to reel back in as needed. No, real growth and endurance are melodies with notes unsingable by the game space, for the game space cannot sing. It cannot art. It does not express. Rather, the game space runs on accumulation, not growth. Maintenance, not endurance. These are the equations within the game space, the American dream sequence. This is to say the story of colonization is an equation of accumulation and maintenance in an imagined empty, blank, white-filled space, and a person is programmed to believe it was worth the sacrifice. Sometimes called a monster, both in what it destroys and in how it can be built up as if there was no way to defeat it. But it is not a monster. It is only a program. One that looms a shadow larger than it really is, and the lives bled for it are on the hands of the people and their commitment to the dream sequence. Quick, turn out that light. Dawn is approaching. I'll read this last little one. I thought gift shops and visitor centers were loved for their bathroom breaks. And I thought marked trails were for people who could get lost, but because they hadn't lived enough. And I thought everyone knew a land holds stories that your mother tells you. I thought there was always an auntie or grandma near enough by, and there was sure to be some rock formation to play on or some animal waiting for me. I thought you bought fry bread at stops because someone in the family owned them, and there'd be some hours under a blue tarp or in the shade for visits. I thought you go to the flea market to see your friends. I thought iced water in jugs was a blessing, and I thought hauling water from the windmill meant balancing along a small ledge along the bottom of the water tank, or imagining all the animals that could drink from the trough. I thought all storms were where the lightning met up with the rain, and I thought all winds were made of several storms gathering and seen from the hogan. I thought the sheep were the same sheep each visit except for the lambs, and I thought the trading post is where the ice cream drumsticks were. I thought all your clothes should be shaken out when you get back home, and the sand in the driveway meant you weren't really that far away from it. And I thought all puppies were dusty and would never run off. I thought the lizards and ants and stink bugs knew I was coming. I thought at the top of every mesa you ate fresh fruit and watermelon. I lost my spills. I thought all sheep were found and brought in and known as the brown one and the mean one, and that's the mom. And then there's always the sheep that called, that one always gets stuck. I thought all hotels in Tuba City knew my parents by name, and someone's cousin worked in the restaurant cooking. I thought there was no such thing as a quick visit, but long hours to sort out the rocks from the sand and to build piles. I thought everyone was thankful for toilet paper and knew how not to breathe through the nose in the outhouse. And I thought all jewelry was silver and rock and cedar beads. I thought all jewelry belonged to someone we knew. And I thought everyone went to the jewelry section of the trading post to buy back pawned jewelry of loved ones for them. I thought pine nuts were the happiest of goodbye treats when heading through the highway noise of Page. I thought everyone knew the deep blue and green of Lake Powell from the highway, but never went in. And I thought all sunsets were best when there was a nip in the air and bellies were full of mutton. I thought all grandmas grabbed your hand too tight and said, shiyaja, away shiyaja. I thought finding rusted tin cans and car parts just over the next sandy hill was a game. I thought every Shamasana and white father walked the desert looking for arrowheads, head down, lifting up rocks with their shoes and showing their finds to one another. And I thought all flint chippings that were shaped like animals or pants or shirts were purchased by your father for 50 cents and that they weren't dropped back down on the ground before leaving the area. I thought running from auntie to uncle to mom to dad to grandma and back again with messages or instructions was playing. And I thought there was always a little baby with big cheeks soon to smile nearby. I thought introducing yourself through clan and family names and areas and schools and landmarkers until you found a connection was simply saying hello. I thought everyone knew what it was like in the shade on a hot day and how thankful to be for cold sand. I thought when we were playing away from the Hogan and our parents were out of sight, we were far into a land of awe and possibility. I thought when they'd send an older cousin to come get us and the younger ones, it meant the sky was ready for the day to end just as much as you were. I thought everyone knew the stars like they are in the desert, winking and falling and thrown about, feeling both scattered randomly and in their most perfect position. And I thought the moon told everyone its secrets of the desert and mesas and plateaus and cliffs and the way time and people have moved through there for so many years. There was nothing that wasn't known to these celestial beings. And I thought everyone knew the most holy thing to do was to listen. Thank you. Hi.
Hey,
So, we have some time for questions or no?
Yes, we do. We have a question, and this is from Jenny. Natanya, thank you. I've been thinking a lot about writing violence, and I really appreciate how you do this. I'm wondering if you can talk about the ways to write about violence without replicating that violence, or how to write about violence without making it beautiful, or something like that. And just to invite everyone out there, thank you again for being here. Thank you, Professor Pulley, for that amazing reading. And we have the Q&A open. If there's anyone who wants to ask a question, we'll take questions in there. And again, the book that Professor Pulley was reading from initially, With Teeth, available everywhere and on Kindle as well. Is that right? Okay, so could you address Jenny Ferguson's question?
Yeah, hi Jenny. I think the first story that I read, Did You Find Your Killer Yet? I got to the end of that story and I didn't know what to do because it seemed obvious that she was going to die. And I tried a couple different endings of, how to, maybe she fights back or maybe this and that. And I did end up feeling like I was falling into that space of kind of sensationalizing violence or romanticizing it. And I didn't want to make it okay, but I still wanted to keep in that spirit of that story where it's just a reality that young girls are going to die. And so as I was writing the part about somebody walking in, I myself was like, oh, like who's coming? Who's coming? What am I going to do? Who's coming? And eventually found that having another girl come made the most sense. And I think that comes from understanding that, sometimes the answer to violence is this kind of mirror effect or seeing it elsewhere or understanding it in another way. And so I think I use that quite a bit, like metaphors in order to work through what violence is doing and what it can do. But yeah, I have a lot of those questions too about how do you not inflict more violence on people in your own writing. But there's there's a reason that it works sometimes in horror, and there's a reason that it doesn't. And I just try and find a balance and think of the purpose of the story or the piece to maybe lead me to it. It's a great question.
Wonderful, thank you. I wonder, I've been hearing a lot about this new project as you've been working on it, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about where you are in the new project, and do you have a sense of it? Like, it's so amazing that you shared that with us tonight. Can you talk about, like, do you have a sense of the shape of it as a whole, or where are you with it?
Yeah, I mean, the original essay that I'm kind of using as the structure for it has 5 rules and 5 axioms and one little break in between to talk about tricksters. And I see that now as kind of the backbone to this, and then all of the smaller pieces are around it. And when I first started looking at it again, I just thought, oh, I'm gonna have to write all this stuff. And then I realized, no, I have all this stuff somewhere. I just have never been able to pull it all together. So most of it is written already. And it's a matter of shaping and then kind of filling in a couple of spots here and there. And then towards the axioms, I'm thinking of moving more towards like some of my more critical work about, writing, Navajo writing, and what art is doing, Navajo art is doing, and Diné artists are doing, and kind of moving to this other space of, where we see resilience and where we see restoration. So to answer the question, which kind of sounds like, when is it going to be done? is, I think pretty soon, actually.
Not sound.
I think it's on its way. It kind of came out of nowhere, and it just ended up making sense with the other writing I've had. So it's a new project in that it has a new shape to it, but it's not a new project as most of these pieces are already written. Oh, but I do have also like a visual kind of side to it that I want to work on, using these old books, these old like, what Indians know, and it was like 1912 kind of school books. So I've been kind of playing along with that as well.
We have a question here from Catherine Kutenbauer, who's joining us from Ontario, Canada. I love the elliptical way you connect the violence against women to the violence wrought to the earth body. You are brilliant, and I'm again in awe of your genius. The personal aspects of the essay are gorgeous, hard but so intimate, and beautifully organized and delivered. I love the collage of it, and I'm really curious about that. Sorry, there's a lot there, but I just want to hear you talk as always, says Catherine. Thank you, Catherine, for that.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, it actually came together over summer. I taught at the Emerging Diné Writers Institute, which is a week-long event for writers that are students, but that are all ages. And I taught a creative nonfiction group class, and I learned so much. And I learned so much from the women in that class, my elders in that class. And one thing we talked a lot about is like, how do you write about trauma, and how do you write about violence when it's taboo, or when it's too dark, or when you don't want to go there. And so we ended up talking a lot about balance. And so that has been my key to putting together this collage, is that remembering that. So after like the rule comes a personal essay, and then it's followed more like with like a prose poem or lyrical kind of work, or image kind of work that sort of, I don't want to say like it heals the thing, but it heals the thing. So yeah, so that's how I've been working with the collage, is kind of thinking of balance between these things. However, I'm noticing that some of the pieces can kind of interchange with the rules, and so I was thinking that would kind of be a neat version of this where it's not in a book, but they're kind of like in cards or something that you move around. But again, there's just a lot there to kind of think about, and this is the exciting part, is not committing to any of it. There's a question from Felix. Many stories and With Teeth are about violence against women, and for the most part have no obvious identity. Are you pulling from the experiences of Native women, or what you observe about women in general? I think it's both. I think there are stories that do refer to an identity, but the one, did you find your killer yet, is certainly in response to the missing and murdered women movement, and thinking about the way that we also consume violence towards women in detective shows, and I really like detective shows. And I originally thought I was going to write a very cool detective story that was like planted firmly in that genre, and instead I wrote that. So I do think that I'm always kind of hung up on this idea that a reader is going to read a piece of writing and immediately assume that the characters are white. And so I think I still have this kind of resistance to that of not having to say what their identity is or racial identity is. And I can see how sometimes that doesn't work because it doesn't get to the point like it should in Did You Find Your Killer Yet? And there's a couple small references to identity, racial identity. But yeah, I think it's everything, and I don't even think it's just women. I mean, I think it's feminine. Anything that's feminine and considered feminine has this violence surrounding it, and so I do explore that in a lot of different ways.
Well, thank you so much again, Professor Pulley, for this reading tonight. Thank you, Magali, for a wonderful introduction. Thank you, Rain Fox, for an amazing poster. Yeah. We will. We have an anonymous question here. One more. Can you talk about how you want to portray a different narrative of colonialization?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it came from, I think it was one of my classes, my Literature by Native American Writers class, where we were talking about colonization, as we always tend to do, and so much. And I just was getting really depressed about it. And it's not necessarily that there's joy in this metaphor as much as I just wanted to take away this overpowering part of colonization where we act like it's fated or we can't get away from it, and it is everywhere. But I wanted to think of it in terms of something as, you know, small as a computer program, right? As non-emotional, non-human, and something that could spread in this replicating way, the self-replicating way, which doesn't necessarily mean that we're not all part of it and uphold it, and do things to participate in furthering colonization. It just means that I think that there's ways to think about a reality outside of what we're seeing. We tend to kind of think of like anti-racist work as, or diversifying work as kind of moving parts of something that's already there into something new. But I really think that that anti-racist work comes from like destroying something all the way down to its nothing and then looking at it again. And so I wanted to do that with colonization and just like destroy what I know of it and then think about what is it doing? And that's where I was like, oh, it's creating its own reality. And that reality ends up creating a lot of violence. And it replicates and it does all these ways of moving around to help itself survive. And so I wanted to take like kind of that like organic kind of living element of it out of the way and turn it into something like a computer program or gone haywire or something like that. But actually not haywire because it's doing exactly what it had set out to do. So I hope that answers the question. I mean, I'm still kind of working through it to try and understand what the purpose is behind it other than to start somewhere new when thinking about colonization and how we talk about the history of this land.
Thank you again, and thank you all for being here. Our next reading next Tuesday, Idris Goodwin will be joining us to read from his new collection, Can I Kick It? Again, thank you, Professor Pulley. Thank you all for being here. And we will see you next week. Same Zoom time, same different Zoom channel.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.